All right, guys, welcome to another Cleveland Moto video. We're going to talk about the differences between two very similar motorcycles. And every once in a while, it just so happens that here at the shop, we get two bikes in either for sale, consignment, or for service that are really begging to be compared against each other. And this is what we have right now. So on my left, your right, we've got a 2014 Triumph T100, okay? This is the Bonneville. This is their base model, the T100. This is what you're going to get as an entry level into the world of Triumph ownership. Okay. Over here on my right, your left, you're going to see a Moto Guzzi V7. Now this happens to be a V7 Mark II. So this bike's a 2015 model year. So we got a 14 Triumph, we got a 15 Moto Guzzi. They're both excellent examples of bikes that are owned by people that are, both of these bikes. This bike's on consignment right now. This bike, we just took it on trade. So these are bikes that are pre-owned, and they've got a handful of miles on them, about 2,500 to 4,000 miles on each bike. So they are what you'd expect to see in a broken-in bike. And they each have their company's representative exhaust system on them, which means British Customs has their pipes on this Triumph T100. And Agostini has their pipes on this Moto Guzzi V7. Now, I can tell you for a fact, we've been in the factory, that Agostini is not a part of Moto Guzzi. They are not a part of the Moto Guzzi factory. They have nothing to do with Moto Guzzi other than that's one of the companies that they make exhaust systems for. On this side, we have British Customs. And British Customs, that's some real curious thing. Are they really a part of Triumph, or are they a completely separate company that just happens to be sold at every single Triumph dealership? Try to go and buy British Classics items at something that isn't a Triumph dealership. You get what I'm picking up what I'm laying down, I think. So let's talk about some basic numbers between these two bikes and what makes them so similar. Let's just immediately talk about their outward appearance. Well, they're both standards, right? And you will see that the Triumph, just in your camera angle, the Triumph looks a lot lower than the V7 does. The reason for that is the Triumph comes with 17-inch wheels front and back. So it runs a 17 in the front, a 17 in the back. I have a feeling that at some point the marketing department at Triumph said we need to make the Triumph motorcycle more approachable to shorter people. And this is exactly how they did it, is they lowered the wheels. They made the wheels a lot lower, and the seat is wafer thin. This is not a seat you want to be on for more than 35 minutes or so. I can tell you, I took the bike out the other day, rode it for 2 or 3 hours, and that seat, I got to say, the geometry on this bike is not happy for a 6-foot tall person. So in the interest of making the bike happy for a 5'2" person, they may have chiseled it away from a 6-foot tall person. I really wish the seat was higher, and I was sitting very low to the ground. I don't know if that's just the general sportsterfication where we're trying to sell this bike to everybody, but that's what they've done, and that's where they are, and that's the product they're selling. That bike sells for $88.99. So brand new at the dealership, this bike in 2014 was $88.99. This Moto Guzzi here, brand new at the dealership, was $84.99. So they're very close, very super close on price. This one is 750 cc's. It's technically 740 cc's, 744. This bike is called a 900. It's technically 865 cc's. Okay, so this one is a 750 that's actually 744. This one is a 900 that's actually 865. Way to stretch it there, Triumph. Good job. You squeeze an extra 35 cc's out of that game, I guess. So 5-speed, 6-speed. Now I want to bring up the point that the year prior to this, the 2013, 2014, the Moto Guzzi Mark I was a 5-speed. And this was the year that they changed it to a 6-speed. They made a few changes to the V7 that year. So that's why this bike is in fact a 6-speed. We did some testing with it back between the Mark I and the Mark II, and we did determine that the final gear ratio was pretty much the same. So they're both of these bikes are totally happy to do 85 miles an hour in their respective gearing. So don't panic about that. The big difference is the gas tanks. So the Moto Guzzi carries 5.5 gallons of gas. The Triumph only carries 3.8. And that's what's really strange, because the Triumph gas tank is big. I mean, when you're sitting on this motorcycle, you're looking down, and it is a really big gas tank. But apparently it's got a lot of internal cutout. So yeah, it's 3.8 gallons on that bike and 5.5 gallons on this bike. So the next thing you're going to ask is, well, what kind of miles per gallon does it get? And they're really close. So according to every article I've read, this bike gets about 43 miles per gallon, and this bike gets about 47 miles per gallon. Now, I've done a lot of riding on both of these bikes, and what I found with my Moto Guzzi V7 is I tend to get around 50 out of mine, so I think that 47 number is pretty accurate. And I've talked to some customers, and it seems like the 43 to 45 mile per gallon number is pretty accurate on that. So these two motorcycles are getting very similar miles per gallon, very, very close. Let's talk about the way the power is made. Well, this is a parallel twin, so that's this configuration. Okay, first they're going straight up and down, and this is a V-twin. It's actually a 90-degree sideways V-twin, and that is going to give you a little bit of a different torque delivery. Twins always are very happy at throwing down the torque. I do think I like the V-twin of the Guzzi a little bit better. I like the way the power is delivered. And this is a shaft drive bike. This is a chain drive bike. And anybody who's ever done motorcycle maintenance will tell you that the shaft drive bikes, that's hands off. You can leave those alone. Just change the final drive oil every so often. The chain drive bikes, well, that's going to be some more maintenance on your part. You're definitely going to want to be on top of things with the maintenance on a chain drive bike. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the weight of the two machines, because there is a pretty significant difference in weight, despite all these other numbers being very, very similar. The Moto Guzzi advertises its weight as a wet weight. Now, what that means is the batteries in the bike, the oils in the bike, and the gasoline's in the bike. And wet weight on this machine is 425 pounds. In contrast, Triumph advertises their dry weight, and dry weight means no battery, no oil, no gas, and they advertise the bike at 470. So that's a substantial weight difference between dry and wet. Now, we did weigh a Moto Guzzi dry because we were curious to see what it actually weighed dry, and it was under 400 pounds. So to give you an idea, apples to apples, oranges to oranges, this motorcycle is about 80 pounds heavier in any configuration than that motorcycle is. And you do feel it when you're riding them. This bike definitely does feel heavier. This bike is lighter on its toes, and you do feel it when you ride the bikes. Now, the next question is the hotly debated question that everybody wants to know about, and that is horsepower. And boy, when it comes to talking about horsepower with the Triumph motorcycle, you are going to have to let your fingers do the walking, because I have found no less than 12 different claims of horsepower for this motorcycle. I've had to go through a lot of different research to find out what the horsepower was of this bike. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you ever want to know what the actual horsepower of a motorcycle is, and you don't have a dynamometer yourself, go to some of the pages that sell performance parts for these motorcycles, because what they're going to do is they're going to do a before dyno and an after dyno. They'll do a before dyno, the bike stock, factory stock, and then they'll do an after dyno, their improvements with their products. And if you look at enough of those, you can discover that there actually is a real consistent before modification horsepower number. And that's what I did with both of these bikes, because I did kind of want to show you guys the way the marketing department can really screw with the numbers. So I found a lot of magazine articles that said that the venerable Triumph here had 61 to 68 horsepower. And I was like, wow, it just doesn't feel like that. So I found a lot of articles that said 61 to 68 horsepower. Turns out in most of the tests that we had read, most of the dyno charts that we looked at, the actual power output of this bike was closer to 51. And that is more what we're feeling when we're on the bike, because the torque on that, the advertised torque on this is 59 torques. The real torques, as showed up on the dyno test that we kept seeing over and over again, was about 48. So I'm going to call it real world dyno numbers, 52 and 48. 52 horsepower, 48 torques. This motorcycle, same deal, but not as much. And that's just because Moto Guzzi doesn't have the same footprint that Triumph does. There's not as many articles written about it. There's not as many tests. It just doesn't get as much magazine space as the Triumph does. I did find that it was advertising itself as 52 horsepower when the number turned out to be closer to 48. And it was advertising itself as 44 torques where the number turned out to be 43. So less shenanigans on the part of Moto Guzzi, but I think it's also because a lot less media exposure too. So you have a lot less people invested in the idea of this motorcycle making horsepower than people who are invested in the idea of this motorcycle making horsepower, if you follow me. Now, about the actual riding of the bikes. So we did a little thing where I'm 6 foot tall, I'm 200 pounds. My wife is 5'4" on her license, 5'2" in real life, I can almost assure you. And she weighs probably 140 pounds or so. So we each rode these bikes. And the only change that we made to the bike, just for her comfort level at all, was we did take off the factory stock Moto Guzzi seat and we put on what they called the lower comfort seat. So by putting on the lower comfort seat, that did make the bike a little more fun for her. She enjoyed it a little bit, but we did do quite a bit of riding on both of the bikes. Okay, so the real riding, like getting the bike on the road and feeling the way the bike handles, that's what makes all the difference in the world. And that's where you do pick up the differences. This motorcycle on the right, its wheelbase is about 5 inches shorter than this motorcycle's wheelbase. So that's a big thing when you're talking about bikes. Sure, a long wheelbase bike is going to be really stable and really, it's going to feel planted on the flats. But a bike with a shorter wheelbase is going to corner a little bit better. It's going to want to change directions faster. And that's a big thing that's different between the Triumph and the Moto Guzzi. That is a big change. And that's a change worth noting, too, between the two bikes. We did a lot of riding where I would be on one bike, she'd be on the other. So there's a big weight difference there. I mean, just in the human factor, there's a 50-pound weight difference between the two riders. And we would blast away from a light. And pretty consistently, the Guzzi would achieve dominance pretty quickly. So that compensates when we would change riders. Of course, we're coming at it with the different weights. So really an interesting thing to think about. If you want the Triumph name, you can't go wrong with the T100. It is the least expensive way that Triumph could build a motorcycle. You'll notice this bike doesn't have a tachometer. The Moto Guzzi does. The T100 was built down to a price point. The Moto Guzzi V7, not so much. Like I said, some of the fitment on the Moto Guzzi stuff is nicer than you're going to find on the Triumph. Get in touch with us here at the shop. We're www.clevelandmoto.com. You can call us at the shop at 216-795-5580. Remember, ring the bell at the bottom if you want to be notified every time we do one of these. When these videos come out, they're always going to be something that we find interesting here at the shop. Maybe you do too. You want to get notified about it? Hit that little bell icon on the bottom. That'll let you know when we produce one of these videos. If you want to give us a comment, you don't like what we've said, or maybe you've got some input that we need to know about, we do reply to all of our comments. Put them down in the bottom as well. If you like these videos, tell your friends about it, or give us suggestions about videos we should do. Remember, as always, ride fast and take chances.